Hey, okay, we are live. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see you all again.
Good morning.
How are you, Laura?
I'm all right. My mom is here babysitting today, so I think I'll be cooking alone. The kids are happily playing in our new summer toy, which is a stock tank that we purchased. They're like big, in this case, metal container for watering animals, farm animals. So it's like a trough, but it's giant. So it's going to be
for watering small children.
Yeah. In our case, watering small children. And, when the temperature goes above 60, they are happy to swim. So they're out there doing that. I would show you, but they're nude, so it wouldn't be appropriate.
I love it. Well, good for them. So we have a couple folks watching. We are so glad to be back and, thinking quite a bit about our work and what we do. And it feels really nice to be teaching again.
Yes, absolutely.
So we are making pizza dough today, which is something that I now make every Friday. Mm-hmm. And prior to being inside as much as we are and home as much as we are, I would buy dough from the grocery store, and it's great. It's good dough. And I probably will, maybe go back to that at some point. But what I found now that I've been making pizza dough is that it's like the easiest thing to make at home. And it's one of those things that you're sort of like, well, this is something I should probably just make at home because it's easy. And you get to then sort of like adapt it to what your family likes. And so I have all of the ingredients. I think I'll sit down for this. Let's see, I have to move this back a little bit. I'm going to move my computer back just a bit. There we go. That'll be better.
You're mixing in a bowl, or do you use a stand mixer?
I totally just use a bowl.
Okay.
All right. And it's funny. So I have a cutting board to knead my dough on, and I have two bowls. But I'm going to be honest, when I make pizza dough on Friday nights, I use one bowl. I do all my kneading in the bowl, and then I let my dough rise in that bowl. So I'm using these items to just show what we have. But this is like, again, it's so incredibly easy that I almost hesitated to bring these other tools out because it's also like it's a one bowl kind of thing.
Complicated. Okay, that's nice. Yeah. Dishes. I like that. And I see Marin posted about, being excited to learn this. And you're right. I mean, we often buy that uncooked dough from the grocery store as well. And that was at first I was like, oh, why would I ever buy a frozen pizza? This is just as easy. Yeah. And now making it myself, I feel the same way. And it's actually a pretty fun thing to make. The kids always want.
The kids love kneading the dough, and there's something special about seeing it rise, and it just tastes different to me. And so Marin, you're the one who got me sort of thinking about the Friday night pizza, because I remember you talking about that tradition in your house, and it's become such a tradition in our house. And now it's Friday night pizza dough with homemade dough. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get about 3/4 cup of warm water. And I did a little bit of a deep dive on yeast and how it works before teaching today. And was reading about how you don't want your water to be too cold and you don't want it to be too warm. So you want it to be sort of like warm to the touch, but not hot or steaming. So I'm going to go ahead and get some warm water, and will be right back. So it's 3/4 cup, and I'll put that banner up here.
So something that may be obvious, but perhaps not, is the yeast is alive. It's a fungus. So it needs that hospitable environment to wake up and become more active and start eating the sugar and the starch.
And you probably know more about, I feel like you've been doing so much bread baking that you probably have a little bit more knowledge about this, Laura, but I was looking into sort of what all the different kinds of yeast are and how they work. So we'll go into that while our yeast is starting to activate. So just getting my warm water.
And And so for this, Jen, you said you just use touch, basically. It feels warm to touch, not hot. You're not like getting the temperature for this, are you?
Yeah, and I mean, it's like you can't really mess it up too much. I mean, if you have water that's too cold or water that's too warm, the only thing that's going to happen is your yeast is not going to be as effective. So your dough won't rise as much. It's still going to taste like pizza dough. It's like, it's when you're making it at home, it tastes great because you made it. So it's not like it has to be
right. I think
the exact right temperature.
The temperature that will like kill the yeast is, I think, 120 degrees. So you're not going to get that just by running the tap.
Right, exactly. Okay, so I'm using instant yeast. So this is, this is called active dry yeast. And so what I was learning about, my bag looks like I have a hole in it. And I ordered a pound of yeast at the start of this, and I will be using it forever because I kept running out of those little packets. Right. But if you have the packets of Fleischmann's yeast, that is 2 1/4 teaspoons. So you can just open a packet, dump it into the warm water. If you don't have the packet and you're measuring it out, you're going to measure 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast, and you're going to put it right into your measuring cup. So that's 1 teaspoon, 2 teaspoons, and then 1/4. And again, that's been already measured out. If you get the packets that are sort of, you get those sort of like long packets from Fleischmann's. And then I just kind of stir this up to get it mixed. And we're going to let that sit for about 5 minutes. Or longer. It's fine if it goes longer. And so the reason is, and this is what I sort of learned before starting today, is that active dry yeast was actually invented by Fleischmann's during World War II. And it was to make it, to find a way for the army to be able to make bread without having refrigerated yeast. So this does not need to be refrigerated, but it does last longer if it's like put in the freezer or refrigerator. But it doesn't have to. It's totally shelf stable. Okay. And the reason you have to add it to water is because it's dehydrated, and so you have to reactivate it. And so the warm water is going to reactivate it. And what you'll start to see after a little bit, and we'll show you as it goes, is that there's like a little bit of foam on the top. Right. And if you don't get any foam, it means that your yeast is not alive. So I did a little bit, but it's going to keep going as we go along. And I always expected, like when I first started making my own bread, I just kind of assumed it was going to be like this big foamy top. It's not. It's subtle. I don't think foam is the right word. I think I would change that to like, you see like a little bit of like stuff floating on the top. Yeah, it's frothy. So we're going to let that sit for a second. And then there's 2 other kinds of yeast. There's instant quick rise, which was invented later in the 1970s. And that is, I guess it just is, what did they say? It can rehydrate faster than this one. So you actually can add it directly to your dry ingredients. You don't have to rehydrate it first. So that's instant or quick rise.
Right. I think it's finer, like a finer.
Yeah, exactly. It is. And so it goes right into the dry ingredients and it'll start working. And then there's something called cake or fresh yeast, which I haven't used before.
I haven't either.
Yeah, I guess a lot of bakers really swear by that because essentially what it is it's like a slurry of yeast that's then dried into cakes, and apparently it has like a sweeter flavor, like a better flavor. Right. But that also doesn't have to be rehydrated, so that's already sort of a sort of slurry.
My understanding about that is that it has a much shorter shelf life. So if you're a baker and you're using it every day, that's not a problem, and it makes sense to go that route. But most home bakers probably don't use it because they wouldn't go through it fast enough.
That's exactly right. And I think exactly. And I think it's just always so interesting to me, like how products came to be,
right?
And what so often it's like out of a necessity that you get something like a dry yeast to make it easier to bake bread when you don't have refrigeration.
Right. That's what they say. Necessity is the mother of invention. Is that the expression?
That's exactly right. Oh, and Renana's here today. So Renana, this is actually Renana's recipe. I've adjusted it just slightly because I actually like it just a little bit more salt in my dough. But Renana is the one. She has it. She's the one who taught me how to make pizza dough. She has a cooking studio called Fiddlehead's Cooking Studio in Mount Kisco, New York, and she has been doing these amazing classes. That if you are looking for some great cooking classes, she is such a good cook, and her food is like everything I eat that she's ever made is like the best thing I've ever eaten. So she's pretty cool.
An endorsement.
We love her. So hi, Renata. Thanks for joining. Okay, so the yeast is going. You want to let that rehydrate for about 5 minutes. And the other thing about yeast is there's one kind of yeast that we use for cooking, and it's called Saccharomyces. Oh, I can't read my own writing. Saccharomyces cerevisiae. I can't remember. I can't tell if it's a V or a R. But anyways, it means sugar eating. Let's just go there because that's the sac part. It means sugar. So it's sugar eating yeast, and it's a single-celled microorganism. And sugar eating meaning that it eats the sugars in your dough, either from the carbohydrates or in the flour, or from the actual sugar that you add. And that's how it gets to work. So we'll talk about that a little more as we go ahead. So we've got our yeast, 5 minutes on that. And then to our bowl, we're going to add 2 cups of flour. I'm going to come back and add that up. So we're going to add 2 cups of flour.
And is it really up to us to decide if we want to use white flour, wheat flour? Do they work equally?
Totally. It's like up to you and like in my family, what my kids will endure. Because if it's not exactly right, they're like, this is not the quite, exactly. However, so you can use white flour. I have a little bit of this stone ground whole wheat flour, which is a little bit has a little bit more texture to it. And I added this last time. I actually really like, I find this dough to be really, it's like pizza dough, but it doesn't have a tremendous amount of flavor because I use it so quickly. So it doesn't have time to sort of like ferment and get all these like other flavors the way that I'm making it and using it. I think if you leave it in your refrigerator for a couple of days, it actually will develop more flavor because the yeast is actually fermenting. But I use mine pretty quickly. And so I added 1 cup of whole wheat flour and 1 cup of white flour, and it went over really well in my family, and they liked it better because it just had a little bit more flavor.
That's what I'm going to do as well, since I have both.
So that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to use a cup of whole wheat flour, and then I'm going to use a cup of white flour.
Great. Yes, I did that as well. I'm feeling just flushed with flour at the moment because I finally ordered some from the Grass and Bone online market. So if you live locally and you haven't checked that out, I highly recommend it. With the source, I don't know exactly where they're getting the flour, but they have it in the market, and it was really reasonably priced. And they actually also, you can pick it up at Stone Acres Farm, which was very convenient for me.
So, that's very cool. I didn't know that they were selling flour. That's amazing.
Yeah, so check that out if you're in the market.
Okay, and then to this, we're going to add a teaspoon of salt. And also a teaspoon of sugar. And you really can't, this is another thing that I learned today, is that you can't have, that if you have too much salt, it could actually kill the yeast as well. So this is not too much salt, but just as a note.
Yeah, I know that when I bake my sourdough, I'm by no means an expert, and I don't know all of the chemistry behind this, but when I make that dough, you mix the flour and water first, let that sit for a while, then add the yeast, let that sit for a while before you add any salt, because I think the salt will slow down the...
Yes, I think that's right. Yeah.
So.
And there are people out there that are far more knowledgeable about how this works. And in a way, what I'm hoping this is the kind of like information that's just like, oh, if they can do it, then surely I can do it also.
Yeah, and then to get started. I mean, so much of it, I always say, is to just try. And like, I'm usually pleasantly surprised that things turn out tasting like pretty much they should.
Exactly. Okay, so then you stir it. And again, you're going to see, like, I try to use as little, besides the Pyrex and the bowl. That's kind of like all I use. And then I use the same spoon to stir it. I don't even whisk it. You could if you wanted to, but you don't have to. Okay. So then to this, we're going to add our yeast mixture and also 3 tablespoons of olive oil. And I actually forgot to bring over my olive oil, so I'm going to go grab that now. Okay, and I forgot my fork. I'm just going to grab that as well. Okay. So it's 3 tablespoons of, I'll add that, of olive oil. And add that right into your flour mixture along with, you can add it to your
Add it to the
yeast if you wanted to. It doesn't really matter.
I was wondering about that, if the olive oil like poured directly into the flour would clump up or anything like that, but sounds like
maybe it will. So this is, I just want to kind of show the foam because again, like it's not that foamy. Like to me, I would look at that and be like, I don't know if that's foamy, but it's enough. It's enough. And it just shows you that it's still alive and working. And you just kind of pour that right in. And then, put that too high up. And then you're going to I use a fork and I just kind of mix it together. You absolutely could do this in a food processor and it would obviously just go that much faster, but it's just one of, for me, I got to get it out from the cabinet and bring it up. And I just would rather.
Yeah, which is actually easier. Then you got to clean it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you're kind of mixing it until you kind of get it to just till it's kind of like mostly mixed together. There's not a lot of flour on the bottom. That's just going to make it easier for you as you knead it. And this is where typically I just start kneading it right in here. And I will knead it until it gets to a ball, but then I'll take it out just to show the kneading process a little bit easier. But like I said, I just kind of do it all in one bowl and then let it rise there. Okay, so once you've gotten it to this sort of like clumpy texture, you can kind of use your hands to form it into a ball and to gather it all up into a ball of dough. And you might have to kind of knead it a little bit in here because, as you can see, it's mostly in a ball, but there's a lot that's sort of left there. So just kind of add that into your ball. Try to get as much of that as you can. And I'll dump mine on the table so it's a little bit easier to see. So you can kind of dump everything out. If you knead right in the bowl, you're going to get it into a ball of dough quicker.
Okay. And Jen, you may have mentioned this, or maybe you were going to get to it, but is this typically like this is the recipe or the ratios for one pizza?
Okay, so when I make pizza with this, I typically make small pizzas about this big around for each of my kids.
Okay.
They get their own pizzas because they all like it slightly different. So Maxwell only has cheese. Ella likes cheese and sauce, and she likes a lot of herbs on hers. Cole likes Parmesan cheese on his. And so I now have their full on, and then I make one bigger one. So this usually makes for me 3 small pizzas about this big, and then one big pizza that's about this big that I do end up eating the whole thing every Friday night only because it's there. Right. But you could feed 2 people with the big one. So it's enough, I think, for 5 people to eat a nice big pizza. Okay, so once you kind of get it into your ball, you're going to start kneading it. And you're basically kneading until it's nice and smooth. So I'll put this up just a little bit so we can see. But you just kind of start kneading it and make sure you gather up any of that extra. And it might feel a little bit dry at this point, but don't worry, because as you knead it, you're going to notice that it's a little bit, it'll start to get wetter. And if it's too wet, like if it's sticky and it's sticking to your hands, you probably need a little bit more flour.
Okay. All right. I'm going to.
But it's one of those things where it definitely feels dry to me. And the first couple times I was like, oh no, I need more water or I need a little bit more olive oil. But you'll like I said, you'll see that as you knead it, it starts to get nice and smooth and much softer.
Okay, so just give it a little time, work it a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. I usually knead mine for about a minute or 2, pretty straight through, and then that's it. So I'm gonna hide this. Let me know if anybody has any questions.
Well, I have a question since I have you here as my new sort of pizza expert. The kneading until smooth, like I feel like that's something I've never really gotten a good sense for. And I don't know, I use my gut, but I don't know if that's right. So what do you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, like this dough is definitely not smooth yet. So you can see that there's like kind of clumps of flour that aren't incorporated. It's a little flaky when I pull it out. When it's smooth, it feels like a ball of dough that it's not going to break apart if you pull it apart. And it feels not rough in any spots. That sounds silly, but like the outside feels nice and sort of like soft and smooth. And so I do this for about a minute. And like I said, I usually do it right in the bowl to save myself, but of course it's easier here. So we just push down and fold it, and we push down and fold it. And as you are mixing this dough and kneading it, there's millions of little air bubbles that are. I'm going to put this up a little bit so you're not seeing just my face here. Hold on. There's millions of little air bubbles that are getting trapped and sort of spread out in the dough. And the yeast, as we remember, is sugar eating. And so it's going to eat the starches and the sugars, and it turns them into alcohol and carbon dioxide, which is the bubbles, right? And the alcohol is the fermentation that I mentioned. So the fermentation is what happens when the yeast eats the starches and sugars. And that's what's going to give the flavor. So the longer your dough sits in the fridge, let's say, the more flavorful it's going to get because that fermentation is going to continue to happen. If you eat your dough pretty quickly after you make it, it's not as much time for the fermentation, and so it just won't have as tangy a flavor. But that's where I sort of like adding the whole wheat flour, and the gas is going to help inflate the dough, right? Those bubbles. And it inflates all those, it inflates all of those bubbles that are in the, that are created as you're doing this kneading process. Laura, yours is looking really nice. Let me see. Yeah, that looks really nice. And did you use just white flour?
For the kneading. So for the dough, I used half and half, white and whole wheat.
Okay.
Put white flour down to knead.
Yeah, the flour that I'm using, I feel like is a little drier. It has
mine definitely felt almost sticky when I started, and then adding the flour and kneading it, I think it feels
right. So maybe a little bit more water. So I feel like my dough might need just a little bit more. I'm gonna grab just like a tablespoon of water.
And that's a good example of how, like, the more you cook with yeast and baking you do, you start to develop a sense for like what it should feel like, and not good in terms of like what a cookbook says, but your own lived experience of like, oh yeah, that feels about right.
Exactly.
There's really no substitute for experience with that. I think you just have to do it a lot and practice, and then you'll know if it feels, dry or wet relative to how you've done it before.
That's right. And you want to be kind of like pliable. Like you want to be able to like form it into a ball, which mine does, a nice ball. And, that it's not going to break apart, that it's going to actually like stretch a little bit. Yep. We've activated all that gluten as well. And so while the dough is rising, the yeast sort of divides and multiplies. So it's eating all of the sugars, and it makes more and more carbon dioxide. And as long as there's enough air and carbon dioxides, the yeast will continue to multiply until it goes into the oven, which is when it sort of kills, the yeast at that temperature, and it doesn't rise anymore.
And so I have also read that, the temperature of your kitchen will affect how quickly this happens. So when I'm baking bread in the winter, my kitchen is on the cold side, I may have to leave it a little longer to get it to.
Yeah, because the yeast wants it to be like a nice warm temperature,
right,
to really be active. And if it's too cold, it's going to slow it down. It just will take it a little bit longer. And then, if you ever make a dough and then, and here, now my dough feels really good. It sort of feels like Play-Doh. So you can kind of see that's really different than it looked at the beginning. And it needed just a little bit of extra water.
You kind of, can make an indentation, and then
And once you get it to that point, you're in good shape. And like I said, I typically will just do this right in the bowl. And what you're gonna do next is you're gonna add a little bit of olive oil to the bowl. So then I have a clean bowl here. You're gonna add just a little bit of olive oil and spread it around. I actually just use my dough to spread it.
Right. So do like a little kind of like flip and roll that around.
Yep. Yeah, this dough is looking really nice. It's so funny. So different flours are going to react a little bit differently too. So that once I started using this one, I think it just requires just a little bit more. There's this nice ball of dough. And you just kind of want to move that olive oil around the bowl just so it's not going to stick. And you just kind of get your dough right in the middle there. And then I cover it with a towel. You can cover with saran wrap or tin foil. That's going to work fine. And you let it sit for about an hour, and then it's ready to use. You can refrigerate it after that hour. And what you're going to do when you're ready to use it is just punch down the dough so it rises up. And when you punch down dough for like baking, you bake breads, and Laura, you probably know this, it actually will like reactivate the yeast. So sometimes the yeast gets like clumped together. And so by punching it down, you sort of spread it out and like wake it back up again. You're like, keep on working. Your job's not done. And that's where you do like a second rise. I just go ahead and use it as soon as it's ready after the first hour. And it is, it's ready to go.
Are you looking for size? Like I know sometimes a bread recipe or a baked good recipe will say like until it's doubled in size or something like that.
I never know what that means because I forget. I'm like, I think that's bigger. But you will notice it's definitely going to be bigger. I mean, it's like usually when I come back, it's like this big. Yeah. So right now it's one handful. It might be like two handfuls.
Sure.
And
yeah, and it makes sense if there are kids watching to think about that. So the yeast is eating the sugar and the starches and the flour, and it's off-gassing this carbon dioxide. And so those like bubbles get trapped in the dough because it's elastic, right? And so it's almost like a balloon inflating with air.
Exactly.
And so the dough gets bigger because that air is pushing out.
Yeah. And so and then it rises. And what's so great about pizza dough is that you obviously don't have to just use it for pizza. One of my favorite ways, let's say if you want to refrigerate, you just cover with saran wrap. So usually I would like let mine sit. If you've refrigerated it now, it's not going to get as doubled. It will take a lot longer because that yeast is going to be going too slow. Yeah. And then if you put it in the fridge, after it rises, you sort of like punch it down. You could put, put it in a saran wrap, I would say at that point, or in like a Ziploc baggie and put it in the fridge. And it'll last, I think at least like a week.
Right.
You can say like 3 to 4 days, but I think you can have it last longer. And then when you take it out of the refrigerator, let it sit and like sort of get to room temperature because it's going to let the yeast sort of wake back up again, and you'll be able to, you're going to be able to have a little bit of an extra rise. But I would say about 3 to 5 days in the fridge.
And the recipe that I use from a cookbook that I like also says that you can freeze it. So up to a month. So that's what I often do is I'll double it because, it's just as easy to make double and then have another one in the freezer. Yeah. So similarly, once it's through that first process of rising, then wrap it up and you can pop it in the freezer. I kind of like flatten it a little bit into a disc and then it will last in the freezer for about a month.
Perfect. That's great. I saw that as well. And it's funny because I used to buy frozen dough at the grocery store. So of course, I defrosted from that. I just wasn't thinking about using my dough that I make and putting it in the freezer, but that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And it's a great thing when you're like, oh, I don't have anything for dinner. You thank yourself later when you find it in the freezer because it's pretty quick.
And so, I would use this typically for pizza, like I said, on Friday nights, but I also will make zappalas with this. So I'll just kind of like flatten it into discs, almost like pizza discs, but smaller, and put it in a pan of hot oil and sort of fry it on both sides until it's nice and cooked through. Sprinkle it with sugar, and that's an amazing treat.
I'm sure that's popular in your house.
It's so popular. It's so good. It's something I used to have all the time as a kid. I remember that smell of the fried dough as we were coming downstairs in the mornings on Saturdays or Sundays. You also could roll it out and make a stromboli. You know, you could add sort of like cheese and spinach or cheese and sauce and pepperoni and roll it up into a tube and bake it that way. Or breadsticks would work really well. Garlic knots, you could roll it out, tie it in a knot, and cover it with some olive oil and garlic and salt. So it's a really versatile dough.
Yeah.
And I think this might be lunch today because we did not, our cabinets are kind of bare right now. I was like, what am I going to give them? But if I could just make some breadsticks here and heat up some pasta sauce and people would get pretty happy.
Yeah, pizza bites. So are we thinking tomorrow we might show like cooking it as a pizza, or we're not sure yet?
Well, we could. I was thinking like I don't think this is gonna last till tomorrow. But I can make another one. I can make another dough tonight, absolutely. And then tomorrow we can make a couple of those options. I think that'd be a great idea.
Yeah, so we're just showing like different ways to use it. And I think I encourage people, we didn't know if people would have flour on hand, yeast on hand, but if you do and you want to try it, you could make it and store it and then bake with us tomorrow. Or just give it a whirl. You can certainly cook it in the oven on a sheet pan with lots of olive oil.
Yeah.
Temperature.
And I was going to say, so I know you can certainly use a pizza stone. I think I do have a pizza stone, but it also is like heavy and in the back of my cabinet. I just use a sheet pan and I cover it with parchment, and you don't even have to put any olive oil down on that. It won't stick. You could put the cornstarch or that you have if you want to, but I just put it directly onto the parchment and it works just fine. And the nice thing about that, which is what we do in our cooking classes, which we'll show tomorrow more, is we can write your name, the kids' names on it, so whose pizza belongs to who.
Yeah, there's something about that. Kids appreciate a personal pizza.
So. They sure do. Yeah. So we'll come back tomorrow with pizza dough. I might have to make another batch, which is fine. I have enough flour this time if we use this today. And tomorrow we'll maybe make a whole bunch of different things with pizza dough. And if anybody wants to bring some ideas to that, please do. And Maren says Cora is dying there. She wants to make all of that. I know, really, it's like one of my very favorite things to use in the kitchen.
Yeah, it's such a great recipe to sort of learn and have on hand because, as you said, you can turn it into so many other things.
Yes.
And things that most everyone loves.
Yes. Pizza pockets.
Oh yeah, homemade pockets. We make versions of that sometimes. It's basically just like stuffed. I don't know if it would be proper to call it like a calzone, but it's kind of like just a stuffed dough with different toppings inside, and that's always delicious.
Always. Good. Okay, so we'll see everybody tomorrow with pizza dough day number 2.
All right, great. Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. Bye.